All right, welcome back. I don't know about anybody else, but I really enjoyed that first panel, and I am so pleased to welcome you back for our second panel, The Future of the Workforce. Like most people, we believe that working hard should leave you and your family with enough to afford the basics. However, too often workers with minimum and below minimum wage jobs take home wages that cannot support a family. Many workers in Maryland face other barriers, like not having adequate time off to care for themselves and their families. So we have a great panel lined up to discuss what working looks like today in Maryland and how we can strengthen opportunity for working Marylanders in the future. Our moderator is Ricarra Jones, Political Director for 1199 SEIU, the largest healthcare union in the country. She has spent her career empowering underserved communities and building coalitions to fight for social and economic justice. Ricarra, and I know this personally, has worked tirelessly to improve the lives and working conditions for low-wage workers and successfully led the fight to increase the state's minimum wage to $15. She also spearheaded efforts to ensure full-time employees earn paid sick leave. Ricarra led efforts to ensure that frontline workers had adequate health and safety protections at work during the pandemic and is a champion in so many ways for working families. Ricarra also serves on the executive board of the Maryland and DC AFL-CIO, the NAACP, and a dozen other organizations. With that, I'm going to welcome Ricarra and the other panelists to the stage.
Good afternoon. I just want to start by saying thank you, Ben, for that introduction. I truly appreciate your leadership and the work of MDCEP, and congratulations on your 10th anniversary. Ben mentioned a number of campaigns that I've had the pleasure of leading, and for each of them, MDCEP has been an amazing partner. So thank you for all the work that you do. Did you all enjoy the previous panel? Weren't they amazing? Let's give them another round of applause. Yeah, they were really great. So I'm really glad that we're having this conversation today about worker justice, because across the country, what we're starting to see is that workers are recognizing their worth. They're demanding fair pay, respect, and protections on the job. These are the same workers that carried us through the pandemic, ensuring that we had the goods and services that we needed. But instead of properly thanking and compensating workers, what we see are that record profits are going to CEO pay and bonuses, right? And wages are remaining stagnant. And it's this wealth disparity where we see a CEO's paycheck is 300 times more than the average paycheck of its employees. You have corporations that we all know, Dollar Tree, Trader Joe's, Amazon. The CEOs there are being paid 300 times more than their employees. And that's led to a call for equitable distribution of profits. So over the summer, I know we all saw this, we saw workers come together and say simply, we are sick and tired of being sick and tired, right? And it became the summer of strikes. We had over 300,000 employees going on strike for better wages and benefits, right? Y'all, you can clap for that, yes. So we saw auto workers at GM, Chrysler, Ford, 170,000 Hollywood actors and writers, 6,000 hotel workers, 3,000 Starbucks baristas, 75,000 healthcare professionals at Kaiser Permanente, which was the largest healthcare strike on record. And so you all know, workers didn't come to this decision easily. They knew that it was a necessary step just so that they could provide for themselves, their families, pay rent, pay for groceries, transportation. So quick show of hands, anybody been on a picket line, supported a picket line? Yes, great. So if you've ever been out there and you're on the streets, you'll see, you've probably heard that one of the popular chants is, if we don't get it, shut it down. And that's exactly what those workers had to do just so they could get a share of the fruit of their labor. And workers were on strike for weeks. We saw some workers that were on strike for months, and we saw some major victories that resulted in historic raises. We also saw a level of activism that we haven't seen in decades, and that's going to benefit both union and non-union workers. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation today because we know that there's so much more work to do, and I really want to get to a place where we don't have to have a work stoppage to achieve these type of gains, right? So I'm honored to moderate this panel today, and I am joined by some rock stars. These are folks are true change makers. We have Christopher Meyer, research analyst with MDCEP, Nelson Vilche, Starbucks worker organizer, and Nalia Rosario, policy director with One Fair Wage. So I'm going to start and give you all just a moment to further introduce yourselves, talk a little bit about the work that you do and your experience, and we'll start right here with you, Nalia.
Hi, good afternoon. So my name is Nalia Rosario. Thank you so much, Ricarra, for the introduction. I'm the National Policy Director at One Fair Wage. We are a national organization that's seeking to raise wages and improve the service sector. I overlook right now the campaigns in 9 states, which includes also legislative campaigns as well as ballot initiatives. I'm really proud of that. We really do this by coordinating with different coalition partners and local elected officials. We also have a research team and a communications team, and we also have worker organizers or employer organizers as well. So with that team together, we hope to really move legislation in these states and really bring fair wages to everyone in the U.S. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Nelson. I work for Starbucks Workers United. Thank you again for everything. I'm very happy to be here. I have been working at Starbucks for about over a year now. I have been pretty much active as soon as I started. My organizer at my store, my organizer for the region, has been really helpful with me getting really active. And I guess because of them, I am here, so I'm very grateful for them. They're not here, but I'm very happy for them. And yeah, I hope that we can set a better stride for tomorrow. That's it for me.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Chris Meyer. I'm a research analyst here at MDCEP. I've been with the organization since 2016. I'm proud to have worked on a lot of the campaigns we've done for workplace justice over the years, from earned sick days to a $15 minimum wage in 2019 and 2020, and then again earlier this year for paid family leave, and for many other things that we continue to work on. The hours that we spend at work add up to years of our lives. It's how we put food on the table, and it needs to fit into a human life. People need to be paid enough to support their family and commensurate with the value they create. And so I'm really excited to be able to work to make that vision a reality.
Yeah, thank you all for those introductions. As you all can see, we have so much knowledge and experience on this stage today. So we are going to take audience questions shortly. You can submit your questions at any time. There's a link. The QR code is right there on the screen, so make sure you get your questions ready. Chris, we're going to go back to you. Could you just start us off by talking about what's been happening in this state? How have policymakers moved workplace justice forward in recent years? And what's some of the top priorities that you see looking ahead?
Thank you so much, Ricarra. I guess I actually kind of presaged what I was going to say just now. But we've made a lot of good progress in recent years. Going back a little ways, in 2017 and then 2018, we passed earned sick days for the majority of Maryland workers. We then put the state on a path to a $15 minimum wage for most workers, which then Under Governor Moore's Fair Wage Act is now accelerated to just a month out from now, which is really exciting. We've passed paid family leave for the vast majority of workers in Maryland, and it's one of the nation's strongest paid family leave laws. So we've really made a lot of progress, but there's also a lot of work left to do. Things like indexing the minimum wage to make sure that it keeps up with growing costs and economic growth. Ensuring that our minimum wage law covers everyone. There are currently a lot of holes in it, such as agricultural workers, tipped workers, as Nalia will tell us a great deal about, that were the product of racist compromises made during the New Deal era, as well as things like improving our unemployment insurance policies, which currently are not enough to support a family, and making sure that we're investing enough in things like unemployment administration and enforcing worker protections. I think I had other things on my list of priorities, but those are some of the major ones.
Yeah, Chris, you mentioned Governor Moore, and we have a new governor we're excited about, and he always says that the North Star for his administration is work, wages, and wealth. So I'm really looking forward to session so we can see how we work together to break down the systemic and structural barriers to equity for working families. Nala, can you just give us some insight into what you see happening with wages across the country, and what do you think we should be thinking about and paying attention to?
Thanks so much for that, and thanks, Chris, for prefacing this actually for us. To understand what's happening today, we do have to remember that in 1938, the New Deal did give most workers the right to a federal minimum wage, but it did exclude tip workers, which was a big problem. We went from $0 minimum wage for tip workers in 1938 to only $2.13, which is where we are now federally. And in Maryland, it's actually $3.63, which is not much better. But voters and politicians know what's happening, and there's a huge momentum for that change right now. In Washington, D.C., 75% of the voters voted to pass the ballot initiative for one fair wage this past year, which we're really proud of. And now in Chicago, we were also able to pass one fair wage with the Chicago City Council, which we're also very proud of. So right now, we're at the point where everyone deserves a fair wage with tips on top, which is something that we really stress out. It's really important. The one fair wage legislation is moving quickly here in Maryland as well. We're really proud of the work that we're doing in Maryland. Statewide, we are pushing legislation right now. And in several counties, we also have legislation that's moving forward in Prince George's County, in Montgomery County, and in Baltimore City. So we're really proud of that, and we're hoping that with time we'll get more momentum and really get to pass this here in Maryland.
Yeah, I love what you highlighted is that anytime we take the issue of eliminating the sub-minimum wage directly to voters, we win every time. And congrats on your recent wins. Nelson, of course, changing law is not the only way that we can improve wages and working conditions. So for folks that are not familiar in the audience, can you talk a little bit about the Starbucks labor movement, what led you and your colleagues to engage in this fight, and what it looks like currently for your colleagues and other Starbucks workers?
So the Starbucks Work United fight started around August 2021 when a store in two stores in New York decided that Starbucks was being too, I would say, overwhelmingly exhausting to the company or to the workers. And so they kind of decided, we need a way to make things a little bit fair for the workers, because a lot of workers have to go through working over almost 40 hours a week, getting half the pay they should be getting. The benefits are okay, but they could be a lot better. A lot of our store specifically, there's a lot of other stores, they have a lot of issues with cleanliness, and we just don't have the staffing to be able to do all the cleaning as well as keep up with the workload that they're given to us. A lot of the other issues is the fact that just the company makes so much money and we see so little of it, especially, and we've seen a gradual decline of like labor given to workers. So in terms of like how many partners we can have on the floor at a time. So one of the things that we've been really fighting for is, $20 at minimum as a starting wage for workers in the union. Paid benefits for like in healthcare, paid vacation, because the way it is right now is that you have to wait a year before you can accrue vacation time. Which means I've just started getting like 4 hours of vacation, so I don't really get a vacation anyway. So those kinds of things where we just want to like level the ground. It's not really a middle class if we're below the poverty line anyway. So like, I think that kind of thing where we want to really regenerate the way the working class force that we have. For me, it's been I was very fortunate enough to be at the Senate hearing for Howard Schultz testimony thing, and I was able to meet a lot of other workers there, and they are hearing their stories and hearing what they're passionate about has made me more passionate about making this movement more than just some baristas wanting a little bit more pay. So that's kind of my thing for it.
That's very inspiring to hear your story about your coworkers wanting to have a seat at the table. Nala, can you jump back in and talk about what you see workers facing? I know One Fair Wages' goal is to abolish the sub-minimum wage. Why is ending the sub-minimum wage for tip workers a racial and gender equity issue? And how do we address the inequities as it relates to pay?
Thanks for that. So what a lot of people don't know, and I think we forget, is that when slavery ended, the restaurant owners wanted to find a way to still have, to still not pay people and not pay them, and not pay especially the freed black workers. So they invented this idea that was that could replace them paying people with just tips, which at a time was a new thing that came from Europe. And so 2/3 of the tip workers in Maryland now are women now, and disproportionately they're women of color. So most of them aren't working in fine dining restaurants. They're in casual diners, casual restaurants, and they suffer the highest rates of poverty and sexual harassment than any in any industry actually in the U.S. We actually just released a report that nearly half of all tip workers and 60% of black women tip workers reported that they regularly do not receive enough tips to bring them to a minimum wage. And I just want to also say that here in Maryland, we did a survey and we found that more than 100 restaurants are already paying above a minimum wage because it's hard to retain workers at the rate of $3.63. So, unfortunately, the restaurant industry is one of the highest violators of wage claims in the U.S. And after the pandemic, it only got worse. So this is an issue that I think with time and a lot of folks have really seen that it's something that needs to be addressed. And with the help of the legislators here in Maryland, we hope to change that soon.
Yeah, I think you really highlighted that the reason that tip workers remain frozen at just $3.63 in Maryland, which is such a shame, is it because a majority of this workforce, they look like you and I, right? They're women and they're women of color. So like you said, I'm looking forward to the legislation this session so that we can try to move that forward. Nelson, when you think about like your differences at working at Starbucks as a union member or other places that you worked before, like what are the differences you've seen being in a union and not being in a union?
So funny you say that. I worked with Amazon for over a year, about 3 years ago, and that was. Can you hear me now? Okay, that was also one of the most strenuous places, to work at, and I think the difference now is that like I have a little bit more hope for like actual change because when I worked there it was a union and it was obviously a big thing to not unionize. I remember constantly I would joke about having union meetings and people were like, don't say that. I was like, my bad. But now like being a part of the union, you see this thing where like you can have a possibility for change, and I'm personally one who's like I don't look at for what is but what could be, and for that, I take this kind of like opportunity to say, hey, like we are in a time where we can make difference for me and for other future workers in the workplace. I will actually say, I forgot to mention this earlier, but in terms of tips, one thing that happened for union stores, if they organized before a certain date, was that they never received digital tipping, which means like for our store specifically, we don't get like the opportunity, the offer for like credit card tipping, whereas other stores do have that. And so obviously that's one of the big things, is like getting those benefits back, as well as keeping the other things that we should be getting. But yeah, that's definitely my look at it.
So thanks for explaining the difference. Chris, MDCEP staff is now also part of a growing labor movement in the nonprofit sector. What prompted you to join the union, and what kinds of concrete impact has it had on job quality that you've seen?
Thanks, Ricarra. Yeah, so we formed our union in 2018, shortly after the Janus Supreme Court decision, which was essentially the holy grail of corporate lobbyists working to weaken public sector unions. And our choice really had a lot of different factors coming into it. First off, we believe that all workers deserve to have a voice on the job. We also believe strongly that a strong labor movement is essential to making MDCEP's mission work. We provide the research, we provide the numbers, we provide the communication, unions provide the power. Also, I'll say MDCEP is a good place to work. Ben's a good boss. He didn't take our digital tips away. He didn't hire a union-busting law firm. But no workplace is perfect. And, you know, Ben could... Any number of things could happen to anyone in the world, and so the union gives us a say and provides protection, you know, in case of leadership change. In terms of concrete benefits, having the union has helped us make sure that wages keep up with price growth, as well as navigating fairly when finances don't allow that. It's enabled us to fairly navigate the return to in-person settings following the beginning of the pandemic. Not following the pandemic, it isn't over. Right. As well as improving wage equity among workers of color and women at MDCEP. I can say our wage structure is definitely fairer today than it was in, say, 2019. I think Ben would probably agree with me. It also has a benefit of allowing collaborative problem solving, where we can work together to know what the problems are, and where workers and management can both contribute to solving those.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I think what we're seeing is that workers aren't just joining unions for wages and benefits, but it's also about solidarity and how we speak with a collective voice. Nelson, I know you touched on this a little bit, but did you have a similar experience? I know you joined your current store after they won their election, but can you share with folks what's driven you to become so passionate and active in your union?
I think we see a lot of struggles with unions, especially with Starbucks. They're the biggest union busters in our current generation. And so I think for me, I've always been passionate about, helping the little guy, that kind of dynamic. I think with that issue, and then having the ability for me to say I love the workers I work with. I really want us to be successful, and I think I can be a big part of that. I really just want to, create solidarity with everyone, in that hey, we can create this thing that a lot of people don't think would happen. I think in 2021, when I was working at Amazon, first hearing about, baristas organizing, I was like, I never shopped at Starbucks. So I was like, that's expensive. I was like, why would baristas need to do that? But then as you work in Starbucks, you start to see more of the things we are being worked generously, like awfully well, or like terribly well. And you know, like every day I go in and I think it's gonna be a good day, and the next day, and then 5 minutes later, someone says my drink was wrong. I'm like, what do you mean? They say I don't know. So I'm like, okay. So I really like working with the company. I just want to make sure that my work is pushing it to the right direction it can be. So that's been my passion for it.
Okay. I think what you mentioned earlier is like the activism that you're displaying is really what's fueling this worker justice movement that we're seeing not only at Starbucks but across the country. So I'll say that's important because when I'm in Annapolis and I'm working on these types of issues, we hear, especially from policymakers, that the policies that are good for workers are bad for business. What would each of you say to push back against that? What are the benefits to businesses raising wages, offering paid leave and other benefits, and to work with unions? I'll start with you, Chris.
Yeah, there are lots. Perhaps the most obvious benefit to businesses of paying decent wages, treating workers with respect, providing good benefits, is that it helps with recruitment and retention. We've heard a lot of kind of crazy news stories about, oh, no one wants to work anymore. Businesses talking about struggling to find workers. Well, it turns out that when you pay people the value of what they actually do is worth, you're able to get more people that want to work for you and they'll want to stick around longer. Furthermore, decent wages put money in families' pockets that they then turn around and spend at local businesses, which stimulates the local economy and benefits businesses, increases tax revenue, all of that. Thinking of the Time to Care Act in particular, so that's the paid family and medical leave program that we passed last year that will ultimately be bringing benefits to families in 2026. One of the major things that it did was it enabled small businesses to provide a really important benefit that workers care about, which matters for recruitment and retention, but provides insurance to make sure that that isn't then going to be creating large cost shocks. And then finally, as I mentioned briefly before, if you have a productive relationship between a union and the employer, that can mean collaborative decision making, a better information environment where management actually knows what's happening, better safety, and so forth.
What was the question again? I'm so sorry, I got caught up in it.
Can you just talk about, like, they'll say that policies that are good for workers are bad for business. Can you just talk about why that's actually not true?
I think for the long run, you will still accrue more revenue because you'll have actual workers who will making the money for you. It just means that you're distributing more of the money to the workers and not hoarding it more for yourself when you don't need all of that money. When you give the workers the opportunity, like when you create this environment where workers are treated like adults and not just like these kids, you can tell them what to do and only they can do what you tell them to do, and you create this dynamic where things can, you can bargain for one thing, and then it like creates this good environment where you really can think like, oh, I work for a company that cares about me, rather than a company where they only care about you if you don't do this or if you actually do this instead. So it looks great for a company to say, hey, we actually do care about workers, so we're going to bargain with them, give them money and all that stuff. And, there is this dynamic that I think if you don't have that, you will always see a decline of revenue or, workers and all that stuff. So I think in the long run, caring for your workers is the best way for you to actually do better for your company as a whole.
Yeah, I think we have to be aware that in Maryland, 20,000 workers have already left the restaurant industry. So in order to ensure that the state doesn't continue to lose jobs, we have to pass the fair wage. especially because of the proximity to DC. I think DC paying good wages is actually forcing a lot of workers to really think twice and just kind of make the 15-20 minute trip over to DC to get a better wage. Before the pandemic, the economic, it was really a source of economic instability. Poverty among the industry workers was one of the highest. The number was something in the workforce of 5.5 million tip workers. 2/3 of them are women, and disproportionately, as you mentioned before, women of color. And it also includes the highest rates of single moms than any other workforce. With the pandemic, it became unlivable. 6 million workers actually lost their jobs, and 2/3 reported that they can't even obtain unemployment insurance because they were told that their wages were too low to even get that. So workers, as a whole, have been reporting that the tips have been going down. There's been articles by ProPublica, New York Times, really saying that people have tip fatigue, and at the end of the day, these workers are the ones that are suffering. Of all the restaurant workers leaving the industry, 80% do say that if they would stay if they had a livable wage. This is really a historic moment right now that we're living in. This is the first time since emancipation that tip workers and employers are really forced to pay a fair wage in order to kind of keep their business surviving. And we could see this with Starbucks and Ricarra also mentioned so many workers are going on strike right now. But 7 states in the U.S. already have a fair wage, which goes up to $20 an hour in California. And this includes the tips on top. So in one fair wage states, we've also noted that the rates of sexual harassment are cut in half, because in those states you have workers that are in a position where they could sort of reject the advancements because they know that their employer is paying them a fair wage. Just to be clear, we do have to understand that one fair wage is good for workers and it's also good for business. Maryland right now is losing workers, and if we don't pass the fair wage, it's only going to continue losing more. So I really think it's time for us to pass it now.
Certainly agree. And I think the lesson is that when you invest in your employees, they'll invest in your business, and you won't see the issues with recruitment, retention, high turnover rates. So we just have to keep, pushing back against that false narrative with the numbers and the data. So Chris, as we talk about data, I know MDCEP published research 2 years ago on the ways fiscal policy changes can advance or hinder workplace justice. In what ways is a state budget a labor policy document, and where do you see progress being made, and what do you think still needs to be done?
So pretty much every public service that the state provides and everything the state spends money on has some effect on the labor market. We can think about transit access, giving people opportunity to get good jobs, or childcare, making it so people can go to work and have their kids in good hands. In addition, we have a large body of laws protecting workers, but those laws are only meaningful if they're enforced effectively. And that requires investing in a workforce that's able to do that. Similarly, with unemployment insurance, as we saw in 2020, when we cut and cut and cut our administrative staff, that means poor customer service. It means people don't get the money they deserve. And then that means that workers who are unemployed have no bargaining power and aren't able to put food on the table. Another aspect is that the state is a really major employer. In 2022, the state employed about 100,000 people and paid about $7 billion in wages. If you include public schools, which receive about half their funding from the state, that's another 120,000 people and another $8 billion in wages. And so when we use our shared resources to create good jobs, that can then strengthen norms throughout the economy to pay workers what they deserve and give workers the respect they deserve. Finally, as the state comptroller mentioned earlier during the video, state procurement and contracting are a really important nexus for good jobs. So that means things like prevailing wage and project labor agreements on capital projects like school construction. It also means making sure that our care economy pays decent wages. Right now, that's one of the major problems. We have big shortages of things like home care workers for people who, due to age or disability, aren't able to do daily activities without assistance. We have a big shortage of childcare workers, and a lot of that is due to poor pay. And so making sure that when the state invests in those industries, we're requiring decent wages, both benefits those workers and ensures that people have the access to the care they need, which then benefits them as workers. Finally, we've, as the state, have a large workforce development infrastructure, helping connect workers to jobs, skills training, helping people get jobs after they come out of incarceration. But currently, those programs have essentially no job quality standards embedded in them. If you're an employer and you're hiring, great, that's all we care about. In fact, in the most recent federal reporting data that were available when I was writing that report, the state was exceeding its goals for workers' quarterly earnings while they were still earning poverty wages. Oh, it's good enough. No, it's not. So we really need to be embedding higher expectations for employers into those programs, as well as making sure that workers who are trying to get a job actually have their real barriers to employment addressed, things like childcare and transportation. So really every decision we make about the state budget, which includes tax policy, making sure that we have the revenue we need, has big effects on workplace justice.
Thank you, Chris. I think we've all heard this before, but President Biden says, don't tell me what you value, show me your budget, and I'll tell you what you value, right? So I think most elected officials will say they know the importance of state budgets, but sometimes what I've seen in Annapolis is that what's left out of the conversation are workers' voices. Nalia, how do we make sure workers' voices are heard in policy making? Can you talk to us a little bit about how you actually collaborate with workers and restaurants to gain their support and insight on their lived experiences?
Yeah, I think we're very grateful that in Maryland we have supportive legislators that are helping us. We have in Montgomery County, we have Councilmember Will Jawando that's leading the bill. In Prince George's County, we have Councilmember Ed Burrows. We also have Councilmember Pat Young in Baltimore, in Baltimore City, I'm sorry, and also the Vice Chair in Baltimore City, Sharon Middleton, has also been a champion for this. Statewide, we have Delegate Adrian Boafo, who's been very instrumental in kind of helping us move this forward. So we're really grateful for them. And above all, we do want to say, also give thanks to Governor Wes Moore for his leadership on this issue. On the campaign trail, he mentioned that this is one of his priorities, really. And I think what he mentioned was that no worker is left behind. Which is really important, and it's precisely what will happen if we were able to pass one fair wage here in Maryland. We're also working with both restaurant owners and restaurant workers to make this happen. We have a coalition called High Road Kitchens, which is comprised of restaurant owners that are already paying above the minimum wage. In most cases, they're paying over $10 an hour, which is way above the $3.63. And they have also joined our cause and our coalition and our meetings with legislators and community leaders to really make this happen. And of course, we have worker organizers here in Maryland that are organizing workers currently who know that this is not fair, that $3.63 is not enough for them to make ends meet, and they really are putting their voices together and voicing their concerns, and we're grateful for that. And I think with all of that is going to really help us pass it here in Maryland.
Yeah. I actually had the opportunity to participate in the Server for a Day program, and a server for an hour actually. It felt like a day, but it was an hour. It was hard work, I'm gonna tell you all. Nelson, you shared your story with us. What do you think we can do to support your coworkers at Starbucks and the folks here in this room, policymakers, advocates? How can we support you?
Okay, so the first thing I will say is when it comes to our fight with the workers and the company, it's not about our management or all. My manager, it really is just as powerless as like we are in some cases. And so it's really not about them. It's more about our voice to the bigger like voice of the company. I also think it's important that we I say this like every once in a while. It's like believe for what you stand for and stand for what you believe in. Because you should always know what you believe in and like know in your heart, and not to be afraid to stand up for it. To know that like for me, I believe in people being treated equally. I believe in getting a pay for me to actually go home and be able to relax knowing that my bills are covered for the next 3 months instead of living paycheck to paycheck. I think that that women of color, women, all of these of groups should be represented in their own ways, and I think it's important that we recognize not just what we're fighting for, but who we're fighting for. I think a lot of times we tend to forget what builds up a union, and really it's you make up a union in terms of who you are and what you bring to the table is what can really drive a movement like this to grow gradually and better for anything in particular. If you come to Starbucks, if you can, try to tip. I know I'm not asking everyone to tip, because that can be an extra couple dollars. It can be a little rough, but it helps the workers a lot. And having a conversation with your workers on what our issues are in terms of our store specifically. We have a big issue of being overworked and being overwhelmed with so much burden and tasks to do when we only have maybe 3 or 4 people the entire day. It is one of those things. I think as a whole we need to recognize that in order for us to make change, we are the ones who have to lead it. And I'm very grateful for the people who I've been around who have taught me this. Because I think without that, I don't know if I'd be right here. And I'm very grateful for it. I guess one last thing would be for me, my mom was a single mom who raised me and my brother on her own, and we turned out okay. We have a lot to improve on. So I think for me, if I don't do what I'm doing now, then all the work she put towards that would go to waste. So I think that's what I'm fighting for. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. Reminder just to everyone in the audience, we're going to take questions from you all in a moment. So please make sure that you submit them using the code on the screen. And my next question is for each of you. And it's, if you were the governor for a day, what's one thing you would change about labor policy in Maryland? What would it be? And tell us why. And we'll start on this end with you now.
I would love it. So, I think definitely equitable policies are really important, I think, in Maryland. And when it comes to sub-minimum wages for the workers, it's something that's so antiquated and really needs to be eliminated. And I think the first thing I would do is get rid of the sub-minimum wage. And not only for restaurant workers, but for all workers, all tip workers, because also a lot of the deliveries, nail salon workers, a lot of folks make the sub-minimum wage, and I think it's time to eliminate it. That would be the first thing I get rid of.
I think I would to kind of jump off of that, I would definitely obviously grow more more laws that could strengthen the power behind unions, but also give a more stricter, like I forget the word, but like make the companies more like at loss if they do something that is against the law. We see a lot of companies that will straight up lie to workers and say like don't unionize because this will happen, when in reality you wouldn't lose those things because you're not supposed to, like by law. So definitely stronger. Oh my god, I don't know the word. We'll get to it later. I think also creating more opportunities and organizations to help strengthen, like those struggling in, like terrible neighborhoods that have been terrible for years. And I think, like creating more like resources or for people to reach out to help those, in need. And like, a lot of black neighborhoods see a lot of, terrible things happen in terms of gun violence and all, but that's not the fault of the black people. It's the fault of lack of assistance or care towards those neighborhoods. And I think for me, that would be one of the biggest things I would do.
What they said. I mean, seriously, but also, I think of Maryland's system of worker protections as being like an unfinished building. And a lot of what we need to do is start work on the south wing that hasn't even broken ground yet. Lots of worker protections that we need to establish in the first place. But we also need to make sure that the scaffolding we've already put up is complete. That means making sure that our minimum wage law covers everyone equally. It means making sure that our minimum wage keeps up with both rising prices and economic growth. It means making sure that workers are fully protected against retaliation and making sure that we're investing in enforcement. So really filling in those holes in the protections that we've already created, I think would be the top priority.
I really love those answers. We got to get you all elected. Let's go. So, Nelson, actually, you mentioned billionaire Howard Schultz, the CEO of Starbucks, a little earlier when you first started talking. And he was actually one of the first CEOs to have to testify before Congress in a few years about the union busting activities. He was accused of breaking all types of laws. What's your reaction to that? Because I heard Bernie Sanders say Starbucks has waged the most aggressive and illegal union busting campaign in modern history. So yeah, how do you react to that? And you were there, right?
I was there, yeah.
Okay.
It was great.
Yeah.
It was amazing. I remember a very funny moment happened was he was saying something and along the lines he said, "We never broke the law," and everyone laughed. And Bernie Sanders was like, "Did you hear that? I don't think they agree with you on that." It was a very monumental moment that I was very privileged to be there. And being there and seeing other workers, I think I mentioned this earlier, but seeing other workers that have been a part or like directly involved in these kinds of work towards ending this union busting effort that the company has pushed onto the workers, it definitely was really, really eye-opening, and really it gave a lot of good light and a good win for a lot of workers, because before then we had been giving the good fight, but obviously the company has a lot of money to put towards putting down the workers, and so it becomes exhausting. But that definitely gave us a good boost in, keeping the fight important, like what it is important for us for. And this was like early in the years, and ever since then, I have grown a lot more passionate about union stuff and more like growing in solidarity with each other. I think only in solidarity can you create change. And this has given me a great vision of that. And I think from being at that moment and seeing other people I've been around me in solidarity of, seeing what we want to change for has been truly like one of the best memories I have of this year and like in general.
So, I was reading about that when the CEO was testifying before Congress, and he said he was offended that people kept calling him the B word. Do y'all know what the B word was? Billionaire, like really? All right, so I'm going to take some questions from the audience, and we will direct this to you, Chris. Do you feel like Maryland is taking any action to improve employers' provision of regular hours and adequate notice, allowing workers to have multiple jobs if needed?
No. We've worked for multiple years on legislation to make that happen. So far, only covering a subset of workers, but so far that legislation has not moved. We'll be continuing to work on that in 2024 and if necessary beyond, making sure that workers have, fair, adequate advance notice of what their schedules are going to be, making sure that if you get canceled on at the last moment that you get paid something, making sure that you have the right to decline clopenings, shifts that allow you to get nowhere near sufficient night's sleep. I remember the first time that I really wanted to form a union at one of my jobs. It felt impossible at the time. I definitely wanted better wages, but what I really wanted was to know more than 24 hours or even 12 hours in advance what my schedule was going to be. It's a big issue. So far, we've done nothing on it. It's one of our major priorities this year and in future years if necessary.
All right, this next question, I'll open it up to anyone on the panel who would like to take it. How do we prepare for robotics and AI replacing minimum wage jobs?
I think the human aspect of like most work is indistinguishable and you can't really replace that in any way. I mean, if you go to a Starbucks and you order a latte and a machine makes it, it's probably going to make it right 90% of the time. But it won't have that kind of connection where you see the person who made it and you know that it was made with care, with like, intention of making a good drink. If you have different customizations, it's sure the machine will make it right for the most part, but it would be very different than a human making it, and that's the same for most jobs. I think if I went to like to see a doctor and to get surgery and I saw a robot come in, I would be a little concerned because it might get it right, but I don't trust any of that. So I recognize it being a real possibility. I'm just not that afraid of it because I know at the end you can't really replace like the human aspect of most of these jobs in the service industry, especially.
Yeah, no, agreed. Do you want to jump in, Chris?
Yeah, so there is actually a decent body of research on how automation affects the labor market, and it's pretty clear that computational advances in automation just have not actually destroyed jobs historically. You never know what will happen tomorrow. But so especially when automation gets used as a threat from corporate lobbyists, it's an empty threat. We've especially seen that over the past couple of years as so many low-wage employers have screamed to high heaven about their inability to attract workers. We've seen recently the limits of, cutting-edge AI with, all the people, using ChatGPT in court and it citing things that don't exist. I don't trust that to take care of my grandmother, help her eat or cook. Yeah.
Now I know we've all seen the videos of robots bringing food to the table. How do you respond to that with tip workers in the restaurant industry?
Yeah, definitely. I think the human contact and the human interaction is really important. A lot of us, I can speak for myself, we go to restaurants and a lot of times we go because of the service. And I think something that we should remember always is that customers tip based on service. And if service is good, then they'll tip well. And I don't see that with any automation that's happening. There's already chains that have had automated waiters, and they've had to go back and eliminate that because they saw that their customers were not responding well to that. So I think the human aspect of it is always important, and it's something that we need and we should keep going.
Another question from the audience is, can anyone talk about laws that limit the tactics used for union busting?
The Taft-Hartley Act from, I forget, 1945 is probably the worst thing that happened for unions because it gave a lot more power towards corporations rather than unions. And I think getting rid of that, that would really help the workers as a whole, because you can say oh well, Section 7A says that you can do these things that are protected from the union as a union for course activities, but you go to Taft-Hartley and say, well, but you still have to owe the company because now they're losing money because of your actions. It's one of those things where you're that is really unfortunate. And that doesn't mean that people shouldn't fight for, what's important. But that is one of those things where it's it really does hurt workers. But I think it is still important that we push policymakers. I forget what the act is called. But there is a new act that have read where you basically rectifies that act and creates a new act that gives stronger protections towards unions. When I think of it, I'll let you know. But
PRO Act?
Yes, that's what it is. The PRO Act is really a big thing we're fighting for, as well as all the other things. What year was the 2021, right? Yeah. Thought it was drafted in 2021?
We're still fighting for it.
That's a
Yeah.
federal bill.
Yeah.
So our last question from the audience is, in 2019, less than 2 of 3 adults had a full-time job. It's the lowest workforce participation rate in 40 years. We'll combine it with another question. There's also changing demographics. So how does that affect the future of workers? Do we think there'll be more jobs available in the future? And how does that, how is it going to affect our future workforce, we feel?
So the workforce participation rate specifically refers to people who are either employed now or are unemployed, that is looking for a job actively. So one thing that affects that is whether wages are sufficient to actually support a family, whether people have transportation to get to jobs, whether they have childcare so that they can make sure their kids are actually safe while they're in the workplace. Paid family and medical leave is also a powerful policy to increase workforce participation, because without that, something that we see that research has documented is that often women who briefly leave the workforce immediately after giving birth are unable to find a job thereafter, or at least one that actually reflects their skills and the pay they were making before, and that ultimately essentially locks them out of the workforce. So doing things like decent wages and childcare, transportation, and family to make sure that people are able to participate in the workforce. Then as far as the jobs being available, we're currently in one of the strongest labor markets. So I know that Maryland currently has the lowest unemployment rate nationwide. I believe that it might, this could be wrong. I believe that it might be the lowest ever of any state in history. Yeah, that's true, since we started collecting data. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a complex question, making sure there are enough jobs available, and a lot of it has to do with things like the Federal Reserve. But one thing in Maryland is making sure that we have sufficient revenue to invest in state and local services that both create jobs and put money in families' pockets that they can spend at local businesses.
Very good point. We know that all good things must come to an end. So as we wrap this panel up, I want to give each of you a moment to share like a brief closing thought or an action step for our audience members. And we will start right here with you, Nalia.
So I do think that we're at a very crucial time, especially here in Maryland. There's a lot of momentum to pass one fair wage. I'd like to invite all of you we're doing a brief in Prince George's County and in Montgomery County, along with Councilmember Giwando and Councilmember Ed Burrows, and we're going to be talking about how can we pass this here in Maryland, statewide and also in different counties. We've invited legislators from Chicago who've helped pass the one fair wage in Chicago to come and talk to folks in Maryland about how we can make that happen here. We're really excited about all the changes happening. I think nationwide we're seeing many workers, like Starbucks workers and other unions, and folks are really organizing and really seeing that they have power. So I think this is a really critical moment in history, and we all want to be on the right side of history. So I hope that Maryland comes ahead and passes the one fair wage.
I think it's important for us to recognize where we are right now is what the past created, and like what we can learn from the past. And I think for us to avoid all the mistakes that have happened, we have to really see what the past did and then create a better future for all of us. In terms of, like the unions finding, more balance in the middle class, I think as a whole, looking at things as class really diminishes the kind of person that you are. If you are being labeled as someone in the middle class, you definitely, it puts a little bit of a weird taste in my mouth, because not everyone in the middle class is, actually no one about middle class is a bad person. It's just they're put in this weird position because of the color of their skin, the way they identify, and I think that it's important for us as a whole to recognize that, through solidarity can we, make that, the middle class, not so much middle class, but just, create a better economic opportunities for all the workers, and I think unions are a great part of that, and I hope can be a bigger part of that for the future.
Chris?
We're in a really exciting moment right now, both with regard to policy, mostly here in Maryland, nationwide, not so much as a couple of years ago, and with respect to the kind of burgeoning labor movement that we have. So if you want me to tell you what to do, number one, get involved, look at our website, whatever, and call your state legislators to, fight for laws that benefit workers. And if your job isn't perfect, talk to your coworkers, maybe, a little quietly or outside the office. Make it happen.
So this was such a great conversation. We talked a lot about the challenges that are facing workers, but also what you heard is about the opportunities and the possibilities for the future of our workforce. So I want to really thank my panelists again for being here today, but also for the very essential work that you do to build power with working families. And for all of you, I hope that this panel was a good reminder that although we're in the midst of a struggle for workers' rights, when we fight, we win. Thank you.
Thanks, Ricarra.
Thank you to our panelists and to Ricarra. When I listened to this conversation, well, first of all, I agree with Chris. Unionization has been a positive for MDCEP, and it's been great to be in collaboration and to be able to brainstorm ideas together. But the second thing is that we have so much work to do. We've accomplished so much together, and we've got so much to do going forward. So I'm really excited by the conversation, by the momentum I see. And with that, I'm going to release you one more time. We're going to go to a 15-minute break and then come back for our keynote speaker. We might actually, we're going to take a little bit more than 15 minutes, but at 5 o'clock, we're going to come back for our keynote speaker. Thank you, everybody.